Step outside right now in the middle of winter. Feel whatever cold is there. Now make it 10 degrees colder. Then remove your coat. Then remove the building behind you. Then remove every building within 1,000 miles. That is not a thought experiment. That is Europe, roughly 20,000 years ago. The last glacial maximum, as researchers call the coldest phase of the last ice age, placed glaciers across most of what is now Scandinavia, Britain, and northern Germany. Central Europe was open frozen steppe. Average temperatures ran somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius colder than today. Winters lasted longer. Wind moved across flat, treeless ground with nothing to slow it. And in this landscape, naked-skinned primates who had evolved in the warmth of Africa were not just surviving, they were thriving. Making tools, making art, raising children, building things that 18,000 years later, archaeologists would still be excavating with brushes. The question is how? Because the human body, stripped bare and dropped into an ice age winter, is not well designed for what it was being asked to do. We have almost no fur. Our skin loses heat to cold air faster than almost any large mammal. We cannot hibernate. We cannot slow our metabolism. We need a core temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius to function. And if that temperature drops by just 4 or 5 degrees, we die. The cold was not an inconvenience for early humans in Europe. It was a daily, nightly, constant threat to their continued existence. And they beat it with a combination of technologies and one hidden biological trick that most people alive today do not know they still carry. The first technology is the obvious one and the most important: fire. Not fire as a novelty or a ritual object. Fire as the single thing standing between a human body and the cold that would kill it overnight. There is evidence of controlled fire use in Europe going back hundreds of thousands of years. But during the Ice Age, fire was not just warmth. It was the center around which everything else was organized. Campsites, sleeping positions, food preparation, the drying of hides. Everything in a cold climate hunter-gatherer existence radiated outward from the hearth. To let the fire go out at night was not an inconvenience. It was a potential death sentence for everyone sleeping around it. Keeping fire alive on an open frozen steppe presented a problem that most people never have to think about. Trees need soil and warmth. On the periglacial steppe of Ice Age Europe, trees were scarce. Driftwood could be gathered from rivers. Bones, especially the large marrow-rich bones of horses and mammoths, burn surprisingly well once ignited. And archaeologists have found evidence at Ice Age sites that bone was used regularly as fuel, precisely because wood was not always available. This is not a romantic detail. It is a logistical one. Keeping something burning through a winter night when temperatures could drop well below freezing required planning, fuel management, and the kind of continuous attention that someone had to maintain while the others slept. The fire was not a convenience. It was the single most important piece of technology anyone in the group controlled, and it had to be fed. Now imagine fire without a building to hold the heat, without walls to stop the wind from stealing it. You have an open flame on a frozen steppe and a wind that does not care about your fire. The warmth radiates outward in every direction, and is gone within arm's length. The fire alone was not enough. Something had to contain it. In 1965, a farmer in the village of Mezhyrich, in what is now central Ukraine, was digging to expand his cellar when his shovel hit bone. Not one bone, many bones. Enormous bones, arranged in patterns that did not look accidental. Archaeologists arrived and spent years carefully uncovering what was there. What they found was a structure. A circular wall roughly 6 meters across, built from the bones and tusks of woolly mammoths. Skulls stacked as a foundation. Jawbones interlocked along the base. Tusks curved overhead. Animal hides, researchers believe, stretched over the top to seal out the wind. A hearth at the center. 4 of these structures were found at the site, and the largest has since been dated by a team led by Wei Chu of Leiden University to roughly 18,000 years ago, right in the harshest phase of the last ice age. Think about what it takes to build something from mammoth bones. The lower jawbone of a woolly mammoth weighs around 10 kilograms. A skull weighs far more. The people who built these structures were not improvising in a desperate moment. They were making architectural decisions, selecting bones by type and size, stacking them in specific sequences that created a stable circular wall that would stand through an ice age winter. The structure at Mezhyrich shows evidence of being used for hundreds of years, possibly by multiple generations of the same group returning to the same site. These were not refugees from the cold. They were engineers of it. The second technology was clothing, and it was not simple. Think about the last time you put on a winter jacket. The zipper, the insulation sewn between 2 layers, the hood. Now make all of that from an animal you killed by hand using only stone tools to cut and only sinew and bone needles to sew. Ice Age clothing has not survived the millennia the way bone has, but indirect evidence tells us it existed. Bone needles found at Ice Age sites across Europe and Asia are thin enough to have produced close-fitting, tailored garments, not just draped skins, but sewn clothes with sleeves and closures that could trap body heat against the skin. Without this technology, living year-round in Ice Age Europe was not possible. The human body simply loses too much heat too fast through unprotected skin. The needle was not a craft tool. It was a survival instrument. Here is where the story changes completely, and where it gets close. In 2009, 3 independent research groups published papers in the same year in major medical journals, all describing the same discovery in adult humans. The finding had been hiding in plain sight for years. Oncologists using PET scanners to track cancer in patients kept noticing an anomaly near the collarbone and along the upper spine. Patches of tissue that glowed on the scan because they were consuming enormous amounts of glucose. The scans were taken in cold hospital rooms. The tissue appeared most active when patients were cold. For years, radiologists marked these patches as artifacts and moved on, looking for tumors. Then, someone asked what the tissue actually was. They took biopsies. They found something they were not expecting. Tissue that burned fuel, not to move a muscle, but purely and directly to produce heat. They were finding in adult humans something that the previous 50 years of medicine had assumed was gone after infancy. brown adipose tissue. Regular fat, the kind most people think of when they think of body fat, is white adipose tissue. It stores energy. It is passive. Brown adipose tissue is something else. It is densely packed with mitochondria, the cellular structures that burn fuel for energy. So densely that the tissue appears brown under a microscope. And unlike regular fat, brown fat does not store energy for later. It burns it immediately, directly converting the fuel into heat. Not motion, not chemical energy stored in a new molecule, just warmth, released directly into the surrounding tissue, raising the temperature of the body from within. Babies are born with relatively large deposits of it, concentrated around the neck, between the shoulder blades, along the spine. For an infant with a large surface area relative to body mass and almost no ability to shiver effectively, brown fat is the primary defense against cold in the first weeks of life. Doctors and physiologists had assumed for decades that adults lost this tissue as they grew and no longer needed it. The 2009 papers said otherwise. Jan Nedergaard and Barbara Cannon at Stockholm University, who had long argued the tissue persisted in adults, were proven right. Multiple groups using PET scanners found cold-activated brown fat in healthy adult humans, concentrated in the same areas it appears in infants. And crucially, researchers found something even stranger. People who are regularly exposed to cold have more of it. The tissue can be recruited. Cold training, extended regular exposure to temperatures low enough to push the body to heat itself, actually builds more brown fat over weeks and months. The body, pushed to burn, builds more furnaces. The Ice Age humans of Europe were cold all the time. Not occasionally cold. Cold as a permanent condition of life, every winter, for every year of their lives, in a way that no modern person with central heating has experienced. And researchers now believe this chronic cold exposure would have recruited and maintained brown fat deposits throughout their lives, giving their bodies a thermal baseline that modern humans, living in temperature-controlled environments, simply do not have in the same degree. The mammoth bone walls and the sewn skins work together with a furnace they were born with and never let go cold. This is the part that reaches back into your own body. The ice baths that athletes and wellness advocates now use deliberately, the cold showers, the winter swimming, the breathing techniques that Wim Hof has made famous, these are all, at the biological level, attempts to activate the same system. Cold exposure triggers the sympathetic nervous system to signal brown fat to burn. Repeated exposure, the research shows, recruits more tissue and builds a more responsive system. You are not becoming cold resistant through willpower. You are reactivating a furnace that your ancestors kept running continuously for tens of thousands of years in an ice age that would have killed an unprotected person overnight. The people at Mezirich did not survive the ice age because they were tougher than you. They survived because they solved the same problem every way they knew how, at the same time. They kept the fire alive. They built walls from the largest bones available. They sewed the hides into something that held the body's heat against the body. And they never turned off the internal furnace, because the cold was always there, waiting. And a body that is never warm enough never lets its last line of defense go quiet. Go back outside. Feel whatever cold is there now. Your body is already responding to it, tightening capillaries in your skin to keep warm blood near your core, shivering if it gets cold enough to trigger the muscles. And somewhere near your collarbone, almost certainly, brown fat cells are waking up, pulling in glucose and fat and burning them directly into warmth. The same machinery, the same signal, the same furnace that kept someone alive in a 6-meter circle of mammoth bones on a frozen steppe 18,000 years ago. It never left. It just has not had much to do lately.